Welcome to Cinemafile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemafilepod.com. Paying for It is a live-action adaptation of an acclaimed alternative cartoonist Chester Brown's best-selling graphic novel. In the late 90s, Chester and Sonny are a long-term committed romantic couple. When Sonny decides to redefine their relationship, Chester, introverted cartoonist that he is, starts sleeping with sex workers and discovers a new kind of intimacy in the process. The film is called Paying for It. We're joined today by the director, writer, co-producer, and co-poster of the film, Sook-Yin Lee. Sook, welcome to a Cinemafile.
Hey, Mike, a pleasure to be here.
Congratulations on a I'll call it a very modern film, modern take on what I think people might generally look at as sort of a rom-com. How would you describe what your film is in terms of the categories that we're used to hearing?
Yeah, I've heard it referred to as an anti-rom-com because it doesn't really follow the normal tropes of like girl meets boy, boy meets girl, fall in love. Actually, I think about Mickey Spillane. This
Yeah.
girl meets boy, boy meets girl, boy kills girl. Like the fiction stuff. It's not that. It's not that kind of
No, it's not
anti-rom.
that.
It just doesn't follow the tropes of like the kind of like rose-colored romance that we often see.
Right.
It's full of flawed people, kind of we all know what it is to like want connection, love and sex, and how challenging that can be.
Yeah.
And so I embrace those difficulties, but with a lot of heart and humor. So I would say that when I think about my movies, I tend to make love stories, but they're complicated love stories.
I mean, I hate it's sort of overused to say a modern take because I don't think that this is a completely modern sensibility that is manifesting itself in your film. It is different than you're used to if you watch a lot of mainstream media, you watch kind of the conventional the studios produce. Yes, this seems very outside the box.
I
Am
mean,
I?
it's interesting how the wax and wane of what kinds of stories we tell. I see some stuff pre-code era, 1920s, very radical for this time. When you look at Fritz Lang's M, it's like, what? Oh my gosh. And that was like a silent movie. And he was dealing with very complex human themes.
Yeah.
Very interesting stuff. This movie is it's a period piece. The events take place there based on events that have actually occurred to Chester and myself, the cartoonist at the center of this story. It's a period piece from the late 90s, and yet I wanted to make something relevant to today. There is always like when you're making a period piece, there's always a pull to like nostalgize something or make it look old-timey or whatever. There were some people like, well, why don't you just, desaturate it and put an app to make, I'm like, no, 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 we're going to have full color. We're going to make it appear that it is the 90s, but I'm going to like cast specific spaces that have retained their late 90s quality. So I really wanted to make a movie that is about now, about concerns of today, because I'm not really interested in just doing something that's a nostalgic look at the past. And so, yeah, these sort of wax, when you say, these ideas are kind of, risque or edgy for this moment, I think of the hippie era, and there was a lot of, beatniks, also 1950s. There have been really extraordinary times of like meaningful engagement with audiences through cinema and art, usually occurring when the world is in upheaval. Fast forward to today. I
Well,
was hanging out with David Cronenberg the other day. We went for lunch and I was like, we were just like going, this world is madness right now. And I'm like, kind of like 1968, eh, Dave? And he was like, yes, I was there to live through it. And it's even more wild today. And so these periods of, topsy-turviness give rise to really interesting movies. So I think Paying for It is one of those movies. And I think there's lots of others coming up.
yeah, I just had a very similar conversation with a friend of mine. having
Yeah,
lived through that period of time, and said, American cities were on fire. We were in war in Vietnam. It was unpopular. Presidents were toppling. There was in Paris, there was massive demonstrations around the world, really. And so we've been through this, but this does feel a little different for me. It
it
just
does.
does.
Oh, it,
It feels a little, it feels actually a lot more dangerous
Mhm.
because for a lot of reasons, which we don't need to go into, but it
Well,
does
oh,
feel, well,
yes, absolutely. It never repeats. And it has very many more ripples, especially because of our technological advances.
yeah.
And it's a very, very, very wild time. And what I feel about this movie and how it has to do with this time is I think that one of the things that will help us through this period is the abundance of care, and also reevaluating our own kinds of prejudices and assertions, being open to looking at possible other permutations of love.
I don't want to pull us into too much more of this conversation about, the times, but it often happens at a time when people are asserting their independence and their rights to certain things in societies. You can go back to the French at the end of the 19th century, and wasn't long after that you started World War I occurred. Well, there's periods of time where there are movements, mass movements, and they often lead to a period of this kind of retrograde regression and all kinds of really terrible things. So, not sure if they do correlate, but they certainly feel like, and we're in that moment again. And well, let's talk about your relationship. You mentioned Chester Brown. This is based on a graphic novel. Your
Yes.
relationship, a long-term relationship with Chester. Tell me, sort of working in concert with each other on this, or how did that sort of play out in terms of what we've seen paying for it?
Chester is one of the best storytellers. His medium is comics. He's a cartoonist. He's a giant in underground comics. I've been a fan of his even before I knew him. We had met long ago. I was touring. I'm a musician and I'm from Vancouver. And I played a show in Toronto and we met and hit it off and fell in love. And he moved back with me to Vancouver. And then I got a job as a VJ. That's like a VJ is like MTV on Much Music. And I got a job to be a VJ on Much Music. We moved back to Toronto. Suddenly I was jettisoned into a very different world, interviewing celebrities, being on camera every day, very extroverted, going to concerts. Chester is very different from me in that way. He's very introverted, very shy, very nerdy. I drag him out to concerts and he would be in the corner reading a book. So our interests were kind of drifting apart, and I developed a crush on someone that I had met. And I loved Chester so much. I didn't want to break up with him, but I was curious about this crush. And so I broached it with him. At that time, a lot of young people were having open relationships. And so I made a proposal. I was like, Jess, what do you think? I just want to tell you these feelings I'm having for this other person, and I want to stay with you. I don't want to do anything behind your back, but this is what's going on. What about opening up a relationship? What do you think about that? And he's like, hmm. And Chester is a freedom-loving person, his own freedom, but he also very deeply respects other people's freedom. And he saw that I was, it's something that I was interested in pursuing, and he said, well, why not? Let's give it a go. So I had the green light to go and, pursue that date. And Chester, on the other hand, he has zero ability to flirt, no desire to flirt, would rather have his nose in a book or draws comics. He didn't want another relationship. And so he remained celibate for a long time, too long, until it was unsustainable. During that time, he realized that one possible way to, have connection and sex is to pay for sex. So he went about going that way. While I was perilously dating, he decided to explore what it was to pay for sex in the late 90s in Toronto. And so he was quick to see that that was grist for a very interesting story, his graphic novel. And he had the wherewithal to write about that which he witnessed firsthand. And that was the lack of rights afforded sex workers puts them in harm's way.
Yeah.
And so he wrote about it. And fast forward later to 2011 when the book is published. At that point, our romantic relate we're still very close. He's still my best friend. By 2011, we weren't living together and our relationship was no longer romantic. But when that book came out, I was like, wow, what a bold and brave book. The back fifth of the book is his historic and academic notes. Essentially, it was a polemic for it was an argument for the decriminalization of sex work. In the back of the book were many notes, and what I found compelling was he drew a parallel between queer liberation and the struggle for sex work rights. Back in the day, if you were a guy in the 80s in Toronto and you were found in, a steam sauna, a men's sauna, the police would raid it and everybody would get arrested and thrown in jail. It was criminal. Now, today, it's legal. Gay marriage is legal. There's been a lot of hard-won rights. But again, as we were talking about at this moment in time, those are being stripped away. And so we have that wane and wax of, vying for these rights that we kind of took for granted. And so anyway, I found that very powerful, that parallel. And to me, it had everything to do with human rights. So I asked Chester if I could turn it into a book. And he liked my movies and he trusted me. And so he said, yeah. And I thought, easy peasy, here's this brilliant graphic novel. My first iteration of the script was transcribing verbatim his graphic novel. And Chester and I looked at each other. We're like, this is terrible. Chester was like, forget it. Don't even try. It's pointless. It was then I realized that graphic novels and movies are very different.
Hmm.
His was very episodic. His was very political. I was more interested. I had to tell a story in 3 acts with characters that transform. I didn't want to be as didactic. I wanted to bring the sex workers to life. In his book, he was protecting their identities. So he revealed very little of them, oftentimes framing them out of his panel. So it was myopically from his perspective. I didn't want to just do a movie from his perspective.
Yeah.
I'm a character in his book, but I only exist in the very first few pages, contributing the inciting incident when I'm like, hey, do you want to open up the relationship? And so other than that, I disappear and I say to Chester, why didn't you write about our relationship? And he's like, well, I was protecting your privacy. I spent years trying to crack the code of this graphic novel. It was tough. And it was only the day that I was reading it for the umpteenth time and noticed that he had seen a sex worker on my birthday. And I was like, oh, that little pang of jealousy returned. And I was like, right. Chester and I were a couple, and we stayed living together for years while navigating different choices.
Yeah.
And I thought that if I just extended the canvas of his book and added a ton of stuff about what was happening in our lives, then things started to come together. And I could also kind of embrace one of the questions that he has in his book. And he questions possessive romantic monogamy. And that's the kind of love most of us abide by. You're with me, I'm with you. I have sex with you, you have sex with me. No one else, then till death do us part, or we divorce.
Yeah.
And so in his book, he questions, is that the most loving gesture? Or is unconditional love supporting the choices of your loved one or loving? Yes, unconditional love is much more loving, but it's much harder. Most of us are very possessive. We want our stuff. These pants are mine. This house is mine. This book is mine. You are mine. So I was interested in that idea. So recentering the story, essentially supporting Chester's memory of himself in his memoir and having all that gristworthy stuff around sex work, but then also including this couple's choices, for better or for worse, and how they come together. So it was only then that it all came together for me, and it was much better. Chester himself, very autonomous, independent artist. He has no interest in making movies. So once he granted me the ability to make the movie, I ran with it. But I always pass scripts by him to make sure that it was, cut the mustard in terms of authenticity, especially from the perspective of the John. The movie is really a double act of portraiture. So it's a combination of Chester and I. He tends to be pragmatic, logical. He's an egghead. He's an academic. He's very funny, but he's cooler, much cooler and detached than me. I'm like a hothead. I'm very emotional. So we have the two of these qualities together.
Well, and what you described, you've created context for the graphic novel in a sense.
Yeah,
You're creating more than, as you were saying, as you beautifully said. By the way, in terms of just, I just want to let our listeners know that we're speaking with Sook-Yin Lee. She is the director of and co-writer and co-producer and scored some of the film as well. The film is called Paying for It. Your previous work, Octavio is Dead and Year of the Carnivore, amongst others. Want people to know in case they want to know more about your filmography. You can go you can go there and check it out. In terms of casting, because I'm sure that was an extremely important part of this process. Emily Lee is plays your character. Is that a fair? Are we
Sonny.
saying? Is
Yeah,
that
I
Sonny?
mean, I don't call her Sook-Yin because that just would have been too weird on set and confusing. And I derive many of the things that happened to Sonny came from my life, but I also fictionalized them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
she's kind of a work of autofiction. So Emily Lay plays me, and
Right.
Dan Byrne plays Chester Brown. Dan Byrne's a brilliant comic actor who also was a big Chester fan. And in his audition said, Sukyin, I'm a-okay with full frontal, and I'll shave my head if you want me to. I was like, wow, okay, that's great. No need to shave your head though, because that would be a continuity nightmare. So the two of them play the leads, but casting is key to any movie. I cast Kristen Milioti in her first feature film role, and she's gone on to like excel in so many realms in films and television. And she's the real deal. I loved casting people that, even if they're on the screen for 10 seconds, you get a sense of their lives, them as a whole human. So I really have great pleasure in casting. And for this film, it was important that the sex worker roles were played by actors with a nuanced understanding of sex work. And so these are musicians and stand-up comedians. Some of them are activists. Some of them are filmmakers who deal with sex work in their own films. So that veracity, that authenticity, that understanding and nuance and sensitivity was really key. Many times they would correct the outfits or share their insights so that I could portray the work, with a semblance of real lived experience. And the comic actors who play Chester's buds, the cartoonists, I
Yeah.
met Chris Sandiford at karaoke one night. He's a great karaoke singer. And also then I saw his work in comedies and I was like, wow, you're the greatest. So many of the people I already had in mind and and cast them knowing that they would play these particular roles. And then with Dan Bird and Emily, I found them within a more traditional casting style. I did see Emily Lay in a tiny scene. She was like a secondary supporting character in Rice Boy Sleeps. And in that scene, I was like, not interested in the scene, but I was like, who's that person? Who's that? Very captivating. So I brought her and Dan together. They had never met one another, but they were on separate laptops for a chemistry read. And in this movie, these two people really kind of bug each other, but there's a tremendous foundation of love between them. And the two of them exemplified that care. And it was very wonderful to see. Out of so many actors who auditioned for Chester, most of them made him look like a jerk.
Yeah.
And Dan didn't. There were only two actors that imbibed Chester with the qualities that I know and love about Chester. And he's a very decent and good person and funny and weird person and endearing. And so Dan was great. And then Emily Lay was wonderful and good to go. She's a jock and her process, I can make her do like several takes. She'll give me one more, I can do better. I'll do better. Like, so when the two of them, when I saw, like, they had never met, and somehow they seamlessly passed a book between two laptops to each other. I was like, what? And they were funny, and there was a great sense of love and care. And that's what I need in this story. And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, I'm so glad that I found you. Do you want to make a movie with me?
Yeah, and I would say that across the board, everyone in the film is very much humanized, very much for even if they're not on screen for a long time, you get the sense of their humanity that comes across in the film. So,
Yeah, and
congratulations on that.
oh, thank you. Andrea Warehan plays Denise, and she's a sex worker in the film that Chester has an interesting relationship with. And Andrea was a consultant, and we were talking about Sean on Honora. She's
Mhm.
also a filmmaker in her own right, and does wonderful work in this movie.
Yeah, speaking of sex work, Honora wins the Academy Award for Best Picture. I mean, that's quite an accomplishment. Sean Baker, if
Yes.
anyone could pull it off, Sean Baker could. And he's been in this field, if you will, of exploring this for a long time. I had him on for Starlit, but I also had him on earlier for his earlier work. And so, I mean, I'm so glad to see that sort of rawness, that sort of unvarnished approach to storytelling and characters being rewarded for what he's
Yeah,
doing.
he really straddles superstardom and then also just like a grassroots, down to earth love of cinema. He's really an advocate for cool films,
Yeah.
very reachable, very accessible, and that's wonderful to see.
In terms of people that you brought into the project who were a part of it, John Cameron Mitchell, who we know for Shortbus and many other films, how did that sort of evolve?
Yeah, so John and I are very close friends. I acted in Shortbus and also Hedwig and the Angry Inch. So we go a ways back. We've been very, very good friends. And I feel that he is a mentor. Seeing him work on set, working with John, there's a great deal of care and respect and good listening and a lot of fun and responsibility and mutual reciprocity and care. He's always made movies that hit the heart, head, and funny bone, and we're alike in that way. Oftentimes, the medicine, the comedy is like the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down. He's just a wonderful person. I'm working within the realm of independent cinema, and so I need as many allies as I can get. And so I said, John, I passed early drafts of paying for it, the early edits to him, and he was like, I love this. And then he said, he would give me his notes and like, what about this? So we are always doing that for one another, giving notes to each other. Chester's a giant of underground comics, but that's not mainstream. And people might know Shortbus and Hedwig, but basically I needed some star power. And so I said, John, will you be the executive producer? And he's like, happy to do so. And similarly, so like we're bringing paying for it to cinemas in the States and reached out to my pal Elliot Page and asked Elliot to moderate a Q&A, and immediately he said yes. And not only did he say yes, but he called up Mae Martin in Los Angeles to see if they'd moderate a Q&A, and Mae said yes. Just a wonderful group of peers that kind of support and like reach out to Sean, and Sean was like, I would, but I have to promote, left-handed girl or whatever. And so, but he's like, but I'm coming out to it. I'll be there. I'm like, so do you want a comp ticket? He's like, no, I'll pay. There's a lot. It's nice to see that kind of micro and macro level of artistry and artists coming together.
Speaking of Los Angeles, where will you be screening in LA? You have your
Yeah,
dates?
it's the Lameline, I
Yeah.
think.
The
And so
Lemley. We say Lemley, but yeah.
Limley.
Okay.
So basically, we have are the special preview screenings. I'll be there with Chester. Chandler Levac is moderating on February 3rd. On February 4th, Mae Martin is moderating that conversation. And then, so those are special previews at Lamlean. You have to go on the Lamlean site, but those two are at 1. And then we go to across town to another lamb lane for the February 6th Friday opening of the actual run. Chester and I will be there to introduce the film only, no Q&A, but it's going to be screening there.
Very good. Well, we'll be looking for it. You can go to payingforitfilm.com. It's also on Instagram. It's the same thing, paying for it film on Instagram and Twitter. And I assume there's other
Yeah,
platforms.
you can follow me on Instagram, Sook-Yin Lee. It's a very common name. So I had to like throw in another E, Sookynlee. And if you go to the Lamlean website, all of it's there. Just look up paying for it and you'll find out who's where, when, how. find us.
They will find you, paying for it.
We have
Well,
Eli Henry, who's based in Los Angeles, a Canuck, a Knucklehead, who's wonderful. Eli and Christopher are actually based in Los Angeles now. They're going to be out too.
there was a terrific Canadian film documentary came out last year, and I think it was last year. The Jackie Shane story.
Yeah, yeah. Elliot, executive produced that.
Yeah, terrific film, by the way. Terrific documentary. Won a Peabody Award, by the way, in case
I
someone
know.
cares about that.
It's pretty
Yeah.
serious stuff. That
The
Peabody stuff is pretty serious.
It is serious. They don't screw around. No, they're not. Yeah. So the film is being released through Film Movement. That's the distributor, Film Movement here in the United States. And congratulations on all of it. It's been a lot of fun talking to you about this wonderful film called Paying For It. Thank you for your time. We've been speaking with the director, co-writer, co-producer, helped score the soundtrack, and that would be Sook-Yin Lee. Thank you very, very much for your time here on Cinema.
Well, it's an honor to speak with you, Mike.
You have been listening to Cinemafile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemafilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemafile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.